I'm Casey Fleming. My background is I founded IBM's cyber division back in the day, so that's been quite a while. I've been doing cyber as long as anyone. I also ran a strategy practice for Deloitte Consulting. Today, I'm CEO of BlackOps Partners. Our mission was to fix cybersecurity at its core and its root cause, and so that's where we're focused on. You'll hear pretty much more about what we do and what our focus is through the presentation a little bit later.
Joshua Philipp. I'm a senior investigative reporter with the Epoch Times, and I've been investigating Chinese unconventional warfare threats and espionage networks into the West since about 2008. I did a lot of on-the-ground reporting in New York and covered United Front operations, overlap with triads, organized crime, and how these relate to Chinese front operations. And so maintained that for about 10 years now. I've been working on it.
So as we just heard, I think through the first several keynotes, one of the things that needs to happen is we need to move ourselves out from a tactical response strategy and into the strategic. And one of on the panel prep call, Casey had a really great analogy that, up until this point, the United States and really much of the world has been playing a game of checkers. And really what we need to do, our adversaries are playing a game of chess, and we really need to change that. So the objective for our panel discussion here is a couple-fold, right? First, we're going to help you understand what the differences are between our two biggest adversaries, which is Russia and China. And then we're going to encourage you to think about how to approach security differently in your organizations, not with what we've been doing, which has really been approaching it tactically with a series of tactical responses, but really doing what we've been hearing our keynotes talk about, which is responding to things from a strategic perspective. I really want to jump into it since we've been, we're starting a bit late here. So to start with, let's talk about, and Josh, I want you to kick this off here. Clarify the difference between China and Russia. Those are our two biggest adversaries. I want to start with China because they don't really get, I think, the attention that they deserve. So talk a bit about China and the threat they pose.
Right. So what we're seeing from Russia and China are subversion tactics that have been ongoing for dozens of years. These are not new. They pull from the same basic pool of tactics, essentially. The difference is, let's look at the basic threat, vectors, right? With Russia, there's the Internet Research Agency, which does disinformation. A lot of it's chaos operations, trying to turn people against each other, trying to break the perceptions in the United States of the idea that a free society can be harmonious, because they're trying to promote their system of governance, right? There's the oligarch and Russian model. There's the US-led system, the Pax Americana. China's trying to replace with the Pax Sinica. They were trying to export the China model, so on. This is a totalitarian system they're pushing as opposed to the democratic and free system. They need to break the perception that people making their own decisions and living their own lives can create a harmonious society. And so a lot of it is chaos operations, getting groups to turn against each other, getting protests to start in the same place, these kinds of things. The China model is much broader, and I'll explain how this kind of started. So China model, start with cyber. We all know Unit 61398. There was 5 Chinese hackers who got indicted a few years back. Unit 61398 is a second bureau, right? They're one of 22 known operational bureaus under the General Staff Department, 3rd Department. The 3rd Department is a signals intelligence branch of the Chinese military. Next to it is the 4th Department, the Electronics Intelligence Agency, which engages in hacking our satellites and things like that. And next to that is the 2nd Department, which is the Human Intelligence Operations Bureau. These work together. When you talk about insider threats, it's because you have the cyber operators, launching attacks on your networks, like setting a fire in your storehouse, while the insider threat goes and steals the goods. And when they do forensics, they blame it on the cyber attack. I mean, many ways these things work together. These are under the General Staff Department. The General Staff Department is the war-fighting branch of the Chinese military. This is warfare for them. And this is not even getting into United Front, Overseas Chinese Affairs Office, triads, tongs, the entire network of subversion that they use. And this network is what makes, I think, the Russia and China threats different. In Russia, of course, during the Soviet Union era, you had, of course, the communist revolution, right? They were trying to push the communist revolution. You had different groups who were loyal to that mission. You had journalists, you had academics, you had politicians, and use the noise on the ground either from a media perspective to say, look at this chaos, look at this problem, how can you say this is a stable society? Or to use it and say, these people are demanding change, and then you pull your strings in government and have them react saying, we need to create policy to change this. But all of it is being orchestrated. This is subversion. When the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia lost most of that. You need a grassroots level diaspora to run these operations effectively. Otherwise, you're limited, like Russia is now, to mostly cyber operations and a bunch of ham-fisted, special agents who don't really do that good at it. And of course, the underbelly, right? The Russian mafia type stuff, which China has as well with the triads. And so what we're seeing with China is exactly what the Soviet Union had, but on a much larger scale and a much more official scale. They have hands into every Chinese community through the United Front Department and the Overseas Chinese Affairs Office. United Front expands the lines of influence, invites people to business trips to China, invites politicians on business trips to China, and feeds them the China story, this new narrative, right? Keep in mind that from a Chinese military perspective, three warfares doctrine is adopted into their military strategy. Three warfares is psychological warfare, media warfare, and legal warfare. These are tools of war for them because perception is what decides who you vote for, what policies you support, so on and so on. It affects the perspective of the world that they feed to academics and feed to journalists, and also maintaining that illusion through censorship and self-censorship. If you say anything other than what we're telling you to say, you're blacklisted from China and so on. And so what we're seeing is a continuation, and what we're seeing is a large-scale effort of unconventional warfare meant to undermine the United States, essentially.
So with that context, I want to jump in. Casey, do you have anything to add to that, or should we jump into the kind of next phase?
What Josh said was absolutely correct. He mentioned that it's warfare. We are at war. China has declared war on the United States through the private sector and all of our sectors, and that's the thing that we all have to wake up to.
So, jumping into the crux of the conversation here with that context in mind, a few weeks ago, Secretary Mattis put out a very interesting series of statements. He called China and Russia great revisionist power and called the great power competition, not terrorism, is the biggest threat to national security. I'm going to say that again because I think this is revolutionary, right? He said that the great power competition, not terrorism, is the greatest threat to national security for the foreseeable future. And again, this is one of those things, as I said to Bill, that just kind of went under the radar in media, which I found to be quite fascinating. So, Casey, can you describe, and Casey kind of introduced this to me on the call we had a few weeks ago. So can you describe what this means and the role that cyber plays in this national security threat? And I know you speak to boards around the country around the world about this and why this is so powerful and why people need to be aware of this.
Well, our country is finally waking up to the fact that we're at war. We're in an information war. It's called, really, the correct term is asymmetrical hybrid warfare. That's the textbook name to it. Secretary Mattis recently came out and called it nation-state great power competition. The U.S. military strategy now, as of about 60 days ago, is now centered at the heart with great power competition. That's what they call it. The textbook term to that is asymmetrical hybrid warfare. Cybersecurity is at the center of that. Cybersecurity is a very efficient tool because it's a one-to-many approach with a minimal investment with a massive payoff. And you can do it from anywhere around the world. So it's very, very stealth. And by the way, in the digital world, compared to 30 years ago, when you got robbed, your filing cabinet was all disarray and your files were all over the floor and so on. Today, your original looks the same way as it was when you left it, okay? So digital theft is something that it's very hard to determine. So cybersecurity is the key accelerator inside of asymmetrical hybrid warfare. It also goes by other names. Unrestricted warfare is another umbrella over asymmetrical warfare. That's the operational side of how it's implemented. But that's the world you are all living in today. Nobody tells you that, but the military just came out and called it great power competition. You can Google that, Secretary Mattis, great power competition. Can we go to the next slide, please? One more.
Oh, shoot.
There you go. Yeah, there, right there. That's the right slide. So it's called great power competition. And so if that is at the center of your military strategy for your country, then you have to look at what our private sector is. Our private sector is how we power our economy and fund our economy. Our economy funds our military and funds our national security. So our private sector is very, very important, and that's you and me. So that's really the core of it. Cybersecurity is the key accelerator. I've got a power slide at the end. You guys can take pictures of it, but it's the money slide that I want you guys to have before we leave here. Back to you, Parham.
So the president also recently unveiled, the administration's new cyber strategy this month, where he called for more offensive cyber. What are your thoughts on this? This is obviously quite revolutionary, different from the previous administration. So before we talk about some of the details, just at a high level, do you think this is the right move? It's quite controversial if you look at the different media narratives that are out there.
Being the cybersecurity guy, I believe it's an absolutely correct move. Our adversaries work under unrestricted warfare. In other words, war without any rules. And the United States has always been, the United States has always been about rules. Even when we were in World War I, World War II, all of the wars, we had rules. This is war without any rules, and I can't emphasize that or overemphasize it. So that's really the key that we need to be focused on. This administration finally said, listen, we're going to go ahead and start striking back at folks. One of the key considerations on that we have in cybersecurity is attribution. Because of the different ways to cloak who the original sender is or who the original nefarious actor is, they cloak it through many, many different servers around the world. So when we decide to strike back, we have ways now as an industry and as our government, we have ways to find out who the original actor is, and we can go through all those different servers around the world that they previously used to cloak their identity. But I think it's a move in the right direction, because before we had our hands tied behind our back, and our adversaries, whether it's Russia creating havoc or stealing secrets or getting into our grid or into our banking system, or whether it's China stealing all of our IP, intellectual property, trade secrets, sensitive data, and so on. Just remember, one thing I want everybody to remember, every time that you hear that there is a data breach, I want you to think that a chunk of America is gone now and it's never coming back. That's what a data breach is. So when you hear data breach on the news, and when you hear 50 million records, or you hear this or that, realize that your children's future has just left. That's the seriousness of this. I call it a game, but it's really not a game. We mentioned earlier, it's the difference between playing chess. We're playing one hell of a game of checkers right now. In cybersecurity. It's very reactive. We throw a lot of products at it. Products are fallible. They're created by humans. They're configured by humans, and they're updated by humans. So all cybersecurity products can be hacked, broken, whatever. That's all it takes. 90% of the issues are through phishing. When we nail that, there are going to be in other ways, other weak entry points into the organization. So those things all need to be looked at as we go forward on it. Go ahead.
And fully agreed as well. Just to understand the nature of the military threat, why the Pentagon responding to this militarily is needed. So Casey mentioned unrestricted warfare. What's unrestricted warfare? Introduced in 1999 by two Chinese colonels, a book called Unrestricted Warfare. It's often cited by a lot of China experts who work on the defense side. Unrestricted warfare is a list of non-military, trans-military, and military tactics that look at what are the goals of war. What would you want to achieve in war? And how can you achieve that using means outside of conventional warfare? And so this is culture warfare, to break the moral foundations of society. This is drug warfare, to ruin the youth of society. This is smuggling warfare. This is media warfare. This is psychological warfare to alter how you interpret information. This is, economic warfare to attack the GDP of a country. This is business warfare to undermine the businesses of that country. And these are all listed on the actual unrestricted warfare doctrine of the Chinese Communist Party. And so what we're facing are when they talk about Russia, they talk about hybrid warfare. When they talk about these things, they talk about short of war tactics. Our adversaries know they cannot face us on the battlefield. They cannot, beat our tanks and planes and jets and all these things, but they can fight us in ways through our legal system and through our restraints, because we're a country of laws and we're an open society. And open societies are easy to subvert. And so what do you look at? The wars that we're facing now are not done through soldiers. The assets in this war is foreign investment. It is real estate. It is, the headhunting for experts on key technology areas. This is why you have China 2025 identifying key economic areas that they want to take from the United States. This is why they're building a replacement to GPS. This is why they're building a replacement to the American-run internet system. They're replacing fundamental technologies, right? And then they're selling these in third world countries and things like that, trying to replace the American-led system. You can overtake a country by taking over its assets. And this is what we're seeing playing out. And they're doing it through theft. They're doing it through propaganda. They're doing it through forced censorship. When you talk about cyber attacks, they don't even have to, at this point, hack you, right? They implement in their law that all data needs to be visible. And if you want to work with China, then you have to abide by their laws. And if you're dealing with a Chinese company, they have to abide by these laws. And so anything you put in your system that has their components is going to have that access. It's the entire threat spectrum is different, and it does warrant a military response. But it's going to be interesting how this plays out, because a lot of it is private sector and non-military.
So what is private sector to do that wants to, especially multinational organizations that have aspirations to grow? Do they just cut out doing business with China? Is that the answer? I mean,
you can take this one.
I'll take that.
It's a tough one, yeah.
Right?
Be aware of your adversary. China is not a democratic nation. It's when you say China, you always need to remember it's CCP, the Chinese Communist Party _communist. So when you're doing business in China, it's not a democratic nation. We all want to believe that it's a democratic nation. They're just like us with the same values and so on, and they absolutely are not. So the first thing is understand who your adversary really is, understand what their strategy is. I mentioned to you there's a slide here coming up. That is what their strategy is going to be. That's what their strategy is this entire thing. So another thing I need to point out is in cybersecurity today, everybody who is in cybersecurity will admit to you that it is completely and utterly broken. It is reactive. We feel like it's just a house of cards, and we're just running around putting Band-Aids on things, because we are. It's tactical. In the layers of strategy in an organization, at the top layer you have the strategic layer, underneath that you have the operational layer, below that you have the tactical layer. Cybersecurity is still in the tactical layer in most every organization in the United States and in the free world. The reason for that is it started because it was an IT function. And in a lot of places, in a lot of companies, it's still an IT function. We got to get it out of there, because our adversaries have cybersecurity at the strategy layer, 2 levels higher. So for us to compete effectively, and what these companies need to know, is that we've got to get cybersecurity out of the tactical layer. I call it the plumbing and the electricity and all that stuff, in other words, the IT stuff, and get it up into the strategy layer, into the organization, because that's what's being thrust upon us by our adversaries. They're using cyber and asymmetrical warfare, great power competition, to come at us at the strategy layer. We're reacting at the tactical layer. So the first thing is be aware of who your adversary really is if you're going to do business with them. Secondly, compete on par with them, getting it from the tactical layer to the strategy layer. And I'm not talking just cyber. I'm talking about asymmetrical and great power competition. And then train your people in how you're being attacked. which train your people in asymmetrical warfare. It's very different from what we're doing right now. In our checkers game that we're playing, we're using strategies out of the 80s and the 90s. We're competing against the competitor down the street. Our competitor today is not the competitor down the street. Our competitor today is our adversary, is China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. Kind of notice the thread of communism going across the top of those? So be aware that we need to do this shift over the chasm, get out of this tactical, stagnant layer that we're in, and looking at cybersecurity from a tactical and stagnant viewpoint, and get it up to the strategy layer where our adversaries have it. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I'm not sure if you were here when Bill was giving his talk, but he made some comments that reminded me of our conversations about the importance of getting all this, the O's, he said, the CIO, the COO, the CFO, and then getting the head of HR. I mean, a lot of what you're talking about is, in terms of being strategic, involves getting the executives of these organizations together and elevate the conversation. And I think, where we're seeing a lot of common themes here along these sessions, where we're just finally starting to realize the importance of elevating the cyber dialogue to a strategic level. Which is
one last point. Cybersecurity and basically corporate survival is a company-wide sport, and it involves, I heard even Mr. Ivanina talk about the supply chain and insider threat and all that. It's all that. It's the whole ecosystem, including your suppliers and so on, but it's all that. Go ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. I think with that, I do want to make sure that we get to, if we can go to the last slide, please. I do want to, give Casey a chance to, there's one more slide. There we go.
Okay, there's your money slide, folks, as promised.
Yeah.
That's the unrestricted warfare system right there, yeah.
Yeah, but Casey, can you walk through this? Because I think, I do want to focus a bit more on the private sector and the digital asymmetric warfare side. And I'm just going to walk folks through this a little bit. And
Okay, Josh mentioned that the strategy has three phases or three sides to it: non-military, trans-military, and military. And if you look at cyber's in the center. Cyber is the key accelerator. The one thing I want you to look at and remember whenever you're showing this slide to anyone, and first of all, I am deputizing everybody in this audience to show this slide to your senior management, to your senior leadership. You are now informed. Every senior leadership, every company, every organization, senior leadership, and I'm talking CEO, executive director, board of director, head of the audit committee, CIO, CISO, needs to see this slide. This is what's being done to you in your organization today. This is their strategy. This is the master strategy, which is the Chinese CCP strategy, but it's also, Russia plays in several of these, North Korea several, Iran as well, but China plays in every one of these. These are 42 of over 100 different methods. But the two things I want you to remember about this slide, when you see it and when you present it, that the espionage that's going on and the infiltration that's going on to support each one of these methods is unconscionable. I remember when I first came up to speed on this, I was like, this can't be. The learning curve on this thing is so flat, and then all of a sudden it shoots up. So when you look at the intelligence hour after hour, day after day, and connect the dots, you're able to see, oh my gosh, this thing is really playing out. In fact, what we did to prove it to people, we assigned some of our interns to put together just a list of media articles between April and August of this year, and it's like 7 pages of just the title and the link, and it's mind-blowing. If you look at it, I promise you'll crawl in the corner and go into the fetal position when you see when you want to see it, and you say, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Nobody connects the dots, and when you connect the dots, you're going to see how absolutely mature this is against the United States and our Western allies. So cyber warfare is at the center of it as the key accelerator. Each one of these is a 20-minute conversation, and again, these are 42 out of about over 100 different methods. All the ones in red relate to economic and transaction warfare. Those are all interrelated. I mean, for example, Chinese companies are investing in Hollywood studios, Hollywood production companies to change the perception of China and to reduce the perception or make the negative perception of the United States. So to control perception, that's propaganda warfare. Drug warfare, you can order any type of nefarious evil drug that you want, or your teenagers can, or your nieces or nephews can, or your grandkids can, and they can have it in their mailbox in 3 weeks. That's fentanyl, which is 1,000 times more powerful than morphine, carfentanil, which is 10,000 times more powerful than morphine. In fact, there was a drug called U47700. 1979, and it's put in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Incidentally, the Chinese are trolling the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office and copying everything off of it and powering their economy.
And real quick on drug warfare, they also supply the precursor chemicals to the Mexican drug cartels, a lot of them.
They send containers to the Mexican drug cartels so they can infiltrate the United States with and supply them to get any kind of material they need. Chemicals to supply the Mexican drug cartels to flood the U.S. with it and destabilize the U.S. from that piece of it. You guys all know about the opioid crisis. Well, China's a key player in the opioid crisis. Anyway, U47700. Upjohn wanted to, U stands for Upjohn, and they wanted to get a patent on it in 1979. FDA said morphine's worked fine for us through all the wars, and it's 7.5 times more powerful than morphine. So it sat in the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office. Well, you can buy that today from China and have it in your mailbox in 3 weeks. So that's just another example. There are many other different vaping. All the vaping units, or most of them, are made in China. They're made with cadmium, a known carcinogen. You heat it up, it's even more of a carcinogen. The transport fluid is formaldehyde that they embalm people with. You get children's makeup is made in China. It's got formaldehyde in it, and so on. It's these kind of things. That's drug warfare, and that's also poisoning warfare. Back to you.
I think we have about 5 minutes left, so I think, so just to kind of bring this back, this event is called Borderless Cyber. And so, when we were putting this together, you're like, wow, we just had this conversation here. We're talking about drug warfare, psychological warfare, and some of you guys probably, presumably, never thought about these things in the concept of your jobs, because you guys are all technology, IT, cyber folks. And I think the reason why we were really excited to present these concepts to you is because of what we've just been discussing here, is that it's important for everybody in this room and for our industry to understand that the war that we're fighting, what has been called the cyber war, is completely transforming and shifting, and there's a lot of proof out there and a lot of dialogue being held at the highest levels of government from national leaders, such as the folks on this stage, such as Secretary Mattis and so on, that is really pointing to that, and it's very important for us to understand that. And so I just wanted to just give you guys some final opportunity to share some final thoughts. Is what can these folks in the room take with this knowledge and apply it kind of to their jobs to help them improve the resiliency of their organizations? What can they do with this information?
So most of the tactics you see listed here have a cyber component to them. Cyber is one of the tools to achieve these goals. You see, it's a trans-military tool, run oftentimes for the Chinese military, but overlaps and through all three areas. Whether you're talking about satellite warfare, hacking our satellites, where you're talking about, getting legal warfare, getting into, let's say your IP and trade secrets at your legal office, these kinds of things. Cyber plays a role in all of them. Yeah. And also to understand, you want to get into the borderless perspective. A lot of these groups, you can't categorize them in terms of how we've become used to categorizing them. A good example of this is a threat group called Babylon APT, which actually Casey's company, I saw they had some documents on this. They created some sock puppets and put them in the dark net and infiltrated some of these communities, and he shared some information with me. And they had chat logs. They had information from invite-only hacker forums and such. And what this was, it's now called C Market. It might still be active on the darknet. It was formerly called Babylon APT, C Market, criminal market. It was a group of Chinese hackers who were stealing all their, they go in under contract for their normal jobs, 9 to 5, and then after hours, they'd go online and they'd sell the additional information they stole, right? Their clients included major nation states, including Russia, including other powers I won't get into, including criminal groups, including Mexican drug cartels, for example. So you're talking about Chinese government hackers working with foreign governments under contract, working with organized crime under contract, and when their workloads got too heavy, they were giving the contracts to other hacker groups, like hacker mercenary groups in like Brazil, for example. And so this is the true picture of what cyber attacks look like. The interest, right? And then, of course, there's an example, too, in this that For example, they were supplied with a remote access Trojan, a customized remote access Trojan to breach cell phones of an ISIS training camp in Yemen. This was under a contract from a Russian individual who was planning on, breaking into these phones, waiting until they carried out attacks, and then selling the data, on these individuals to governments because they were more valuable after an attack had been carried out. This is what this is what real APT groups look like. This is what it actually looks like, and this blows out of the water everything we know about digital forensics.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Casey?
To Josh's point, the Chinese and the Russians are very active in the dark net. The dark net is kind of like the new frontier in cyber and in IT. It's the high growth area, and they basically subcontract work. They have other nation state folks, other nationalities doing the work for them as subcontractors because it's a money game and that kind of thing. This is the new world order that we're in. It's not going to change. It's an arms race. It's only going to get worse. The quicker that your organization understands this strategy and changes and shifts it back up to the tactical layer in your from the tactical layer to the strategic layer in your organization, the cloud's kind of clear. Because right now, everybody's extremely busy doing the wrong things in cybersecurity. That's my opinion, and like I said, I've been doing this a long time. Once you understand the strategy of your adversaries, think about it. If you're at war, how can you fight your adversary if you don't know what their strategy is? And so the point is, the key here is to understand their strategy, which you have in front of you, and act accordingly. It means it's a cultural change in your organization. It's a policy change in your organization, and it's kind of a funding allocation change. It doesn't have to be, instead of a couple of these software products that may not work, average enterprise has 85 cybersecurity software products and 250 total applications. Maybe take out 5 that are less performing and redirect it into changing the culture in your organization around strategy in fighting this war.
Excellent. Gentlemen, thank you so much. Please help me in thanking our panelists. And with that, I'm going to ask Sean Kelly to come up, and the panelists for the next session entitled Next Generation Technologies to Defend Against the Cunning Hackers. That will be moderated by my friend and ICIT fellow, Sean Kelly, and you guys will be done seeing my mug for a little bit.
What's up, brother? Good. How you doing?
Good.
We're running 10 minutes late, so just basically go to
58?
Yeah,
Okay.
go to 58.
Okay. He was here. He was here.
He's there?
When Adewale shows up, he could just come on up, I guess. So we checked on the internet searches. Casey and Joshua have you all looking how to live off the grid. So we saw that. But I think they bring some valuable points. And so as we go to the next part is, what are the next generation technologies to defend against cunning hackers? So what is it that we have to do? So before we start, I want to let Don have a chance to introduce himself and what he does.
Well, I'm Don McLean. I'm Chief Cybersecurity Technologist for DLT Solutions. And here's my partner in crime. And prior to coming to DLT Solutions, I ran cybersecurity programs for several government agencies, FAA, FBI, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, U.S. attorneys, and some others. And so that's my perspective, is seeing what goes on up close and personal in federal cybersecurity programs. About 3.5 years ago, I joined DLT, and in that capacity, I do a lot of speaking and writing and evangelizing cybersecurity. And I am now going to think on a much more strategic level than I used to. So,
Adewale.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Adewale Omoni. I work for IBM. I design, implement, deploy cybersecurity-based solutions for most of our federal agencies that we support. I would say the last 3+ years now, we've focused quite heavily on blockchain-based technologies. So we've gone from using blockchain-based design considerations to better secure systems to now actually building cybersecurity-based blockchain solutions for federal agencies.
And I am Sean Kelly. I am the host of Cyber Chat with Sean Kelly on Federal News Radio. We are launching also a new cyber television show on WJLA TV, part of the Government Matters family. hopefully next month, which will be exclusively covering cyber topics. I'm the former CISO at EPA, former Deputy CIO at VA, and currently Vice President of Business Development at Leidos for Military and Veteran Health Solutions. So, gentlemen, and let me start with Adewale. Before we start, set the stage. Where are we at today in the state of products that we look at as we try to defend against what we just heard from the last panel?
And so I caught the tail end of Sean said. I caught the tail end of the prior panel, but I think I want to start with an article that I read this morning on.
See, we prepare.
On how, and I know it's easy for us to actually point at state actors, but it's I would say 5-10 years ago, what seemed to me as sci-fi, very contrarian, really fear-mongering. It's real. So we an article on, I believe it was Bloomberg, where Amazon and Apple, through tainted supply chains, we got a state actor embedded inside a critical component, chips, the size of smaller than a grain of rice. Just imagine this. The size of a grain of rice embedded inside of systems where data, sensitive data, has been exfiltrated from classified systems to a state actor. So that's the kind of threat that I would say 5 years ago when we spoke about this at IBM, where we said, hey, this is stuff that we're contending with, this kind of challenges. We don't necessarily think it's real, something that we need to worry about now. So it's beyond the consumers. It's at a state level where it's hard to keep up with. And it brings in all the things we've heard so far today around the notion of depth in defense, where it's a continuation of like multiple things. It's not just the technology, it's the people, it's the process, it's all the things we do from a cyber hygiene that we need to think to actually use to have a better chance of actually securing our networks. So it's pretty scary times, but we don't mean to be alarmist at all, but it's real, it's happening, and we need to be ready for it.
Don?
Well, I go to a lot of conferences, RSA, Black Hat, and so on, and of course every vendor has the latest and greatest solution that's going to fix all of the problems. Of course, we all know that that's not really true. We just heard how vulnerable we are as an open society, and we certainly have to recognize that and take action to protect ourselves. That said, one of our strengths as an open society is that we can innovate. We do, there is such a thing as Yankee ingenuity. A lot of the technologies that are being used against us, we invented. I mean, where did the internet come from? It came from DARPA, or it came from the United States. So I think that while it's true that we are reactive, while it's true that there are a lot of sort of hysterical attempts to find the ultimate solution to everything, and I think sometimes blockchain is mischaracterized as one of those. I also think it's important that we continue to innovate and that government continue to support innovation in cybersecurity, because if we don't do that, they're just going to eat our lunch, Russia and China and all the other adversaries.
So we're in Washington, D.C. We're a government town. A great deal of us that are in this town working are in the government business, or at least have a government business sector inside of our businesses. So what's their role in innovation? We have the innovation groups, Silicon Valley, the Defense Innovation Group, but really, can the government bring that level of innovation to the marketplace?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are organizations within the government right now that are completely supportive of innovation, because I think it's the jury is out now, where we know for a fact that we need to innovate. We need to be competitive in order to actually challenge the status quo. So I think guys like DHS, for instance, they have an innovation fund where they're funding startups, companies to actually help innovate on all this technology to help better our chances of actually protecting critical systems. So it's real. There are things around that stuff that the DoD is doing right now around the bug bounty program. So these are things where when I go to Black Hat RSA conferences in the years past, where we thought, again, this is not something that we need to be embracing. So there are out of the norm principles where the DoD, DHS, all these agencies are adopting. Things around, again, the bug bounty program is big. Stuff that DHS is doing around, again, innovating quickly, because, again, that's the only way we can compete with adversaries, is being at the forefront of this cutting-edge technologies. So I think it's critically important. The public-private partnership is key, and I think the only way we stand a chance at being competitive is being innovative.
I agree with that, and I think it's very important for government to realize that although most people think of government as a big, slow-moving, risk-averse bureaucracy, that's certainly true on the whole. On the other hand, the government is also in a better position to experiment and fail than business. They don't have to show revenue or profit for this quarter. They can afford the longer-term cycles of development. After all, that's where the internet came from. I think models such as the DIU, or DIUX as it was officially called before, in Defense Innovation Unit, are critical. They have a simple application process. They have a quick turnaround time. You can negotiate payments and milestones and evaluation criteria. It follows a fast-paced business model to foster innovation. So I don't think that it's possible to change the culture throughout government to suddenly turn the U.S. federal government and all its ponderous size into a source of innovation. But I do think that you can create organizations such as DIU or DIUX and use those as sort of the tip of the spear to foster innovation, usually in conjunction with private industry. So I think there's a role for government there, as long as it's done in a very targeted, very specific way, and with an appreciation for a government's ability to absorb some of the financial losses that might be more difficult for private industry to take.
Don, talk about the viability now and in the future. Give me some pros and cons of blockchain. There was a lot out there about blockchain.
Well, blockchain is, there's the Gartner hype cycle. I mean, I remember about a year ago reading books and listening to seminars where people literally think it's going to solve world hunger. I think it was the top of the hype cycle then. Now we're starting to see some disillusionment. At the last RSA conference I attended, the keynote speakers were very down on blockchain. They thought it was had very limited use cases, and their big complaint or their big concern was the lack of scalability. On the other hand, it's got some very, very powerful capabilities, and it's also getting a lot of traction both in private industry and in the government. There's a Government Blockchain Association, a separate organization to foster this. GSA has some huge initiatives going on to look at all sorts of applications. We're seeing Twitter is looking at it for identifying, for managing their data, identifying bogus users, and so on and so forth. And so I think that there are a lot of specific use cases out there. The Navy's looking at using blockchain to manage supply chain risk. There's a lot of potential use cases for it. You can't overhype it. It's not ketchup. You can't just pour blockchain sauce on everything and make it taste better, right? But I think there's definitely some very strong possibilities. In fact, earlier this week, I think it was Monday, there was a blockchain promotion bill introduced into Congress. I don't know how far that will get or if it will be passed. And there's even a congressional blockchain caucus. So it's getting a lot of attention. I'm encouraged that it's getting a lot of attention, that such a relatively new and breakthrough technology is being acknowledged throughout government. On the other hand, it may be overhyped as well, but I will defer to Adewale, who's got blockchain in his title, so see what he has to say.
Rightly so.
Probably everything I said was wrong, right?
No, absolutely, you're spot on. And I think my foray into blockchain was a function of a business school course 4 years ago at NYU. We were looking to solve a digital identity problem, and being a cybersecurity architect, like I saw all the cryptography, all the inherent features that we think we can really solve some profound systemic problems. I agree with you that yes, the hype cycle is real. However, the notion of using blockchain is just a piece of the puzzle. It's not a really complex, sexy solution, to be honest with you. It's really decentralized databases. We've worked with databases for years. It's not new. It's been around since the 80s. It's just the notion of being cryptographically signed, the provenance, and all the beautiful things about the technology. So I would say specifically as it pertains to cybersecurity, any one of the main profound use cases, the one that I really like is supply chain. And going back to how I started my morning with a conference call and exactly this exposure where microchips, not even a product like imagine a phone where I can tell with good confidence right now that I'm in a meeting at a classified client. Well, for one, you shouldn't even have this in a classified SCIF, but in a meeting where this is beaming over information to a state actor. So this is the kind of things that we're talking about here. Any one device, a phone, anything that you work around with, things you use in your homes, giving you the degree of confidence of actually having transparency, the visibility, where for everyone that touched everything, every microprocessor on the device, you can tell that there's an audit trail that a product, a server, a microchip has not been tainted across the supply chain. So those are like some of the low-line, functionalities that we're using. We're in labs right now in our studios, IBM, where we're building tools to actually have trusted computing environments. So those kind of things we're working on. That's one. Identity is big. So imagine not just the identity of me, Adewale, or Sean, the identity of a device, being able to actually track it, to onboard it, to remove it, and moving away from this traditional way of managing solutions where, for the most part, we've always done things through a PKI. Again, it's centralized theme. So moving away from this notion of like building walls around your crown jewels, putting firewall switches around it, to a dichotomy where it's completely decentralized, right? So it's a mind blows things that we as 15 career year long consultants like myself, we thought was crazy talk, where you said, hey, you completely decentralize something and put some cryptography around it and think it's safe. But those are the kind of thinking that we're using today, where we move away from like a single point of failure to a completely decentralized point of solution, where again, once I'm compromised doesn't necessarily mean the rest of the guys are compromised, because again, it's all tethered sequentially, chronologically with cryptography. So those are, it's a new age, it's innovation. It's early, but we're really making profound strides to actually get to a point where we can build trusted systems.
I think it's worth noting, too, that we're all familiar with cryptocurrency. I'm a little too familiar because I lost a little bit of money. But anyway, we're all familiar with cryptocurrency, and that's like currently the biggest single real-world use case that's out there. But there are real-world use cases out there. These aren't just science projects. Although in the United States, they're mostly sort of in the development stage, but the nation of Estonia has real-world use cases for blockchain. They actually have all of their healthcare records for every single one of their citizens is on a blockchain distributed ledger. They're looking at other applications as well in insurance, and also I believe that they're working on election security as well, which also I think is one of the more potentially groundbreaking uses for blockchain in the United States. I mean, it's not going to happen this election, that's for sure. We need to get to paper ballots now, but at some point, I think that's one of the more telling or pertinent use cases for blockchain is election security. And there are countries out there that are actually doing this in real-world cases. These aren't just science projects or cryptocurrency.
So shifting a little bit, you mentioned the differing opinions on blockchain, and one that I'm familiar with is that as these databases grow and grow and grow, that the processing power that would be able to handle them as this grows is just not there. So, Adewale, let's talk about quantum computing. Where are we today? Where are we going to be in the future? And what are the pros and cons? Are we really going to get there? And by the way, there's always the argument, is America really in the first place and running for this race?
All right, so those are two questions, and I want to decouple them. There is often so part of my job right now for the conversations that I have is we try to decouple the potential use cases of cryptocurrency, of blockchain, and I just made the same mistake here, where we get into a meeting, we first need to demystify and say, no, it's not it's not Bitcoin, it's not Bitcoin, it's not Bitcoin. It behooves me to start up those meetings with that. And the confusion typically is, with Bitcoin, there's a notion of scalability where you need to reach consensus that everyone in this room agreed that I just handed over $1 to my co-panelist, and we see that it did happen. So that's the reality to actually run transactions for the permissionless type blockchain implementations. However, for enterprises, for critical systems, we don't play in consensus where everyone in the room needs to see that a transaction did happen. So the proof of burden is on the notion of actually having validated nodes, where not everyone in here needs to see that consensus has happened. We can nominate, typically, what we do with IBM with a Hyperledger project is the notion of having permissioned instances, where a set number of nodes, we know exactly who you are. Those are the guys participating on the network. So that's a key distinction that we're trying to decouple, right? Where permissioned and permissionless blockchains. the notion of scalability is not a concern for mission-type blockchains. Do you have a question, sir?
We could. We can
Is
wait.
that burning or?
Yeah, I mean, if it's a, go ahead.
Distributed ledgers and blockchains have sort of made claims, and there's been a bunch of press coming out, and I wouldn't call it press, actually technical studies coming out. There was the announcement by 360 that they basically taken root control through a Sybil attack on the consensus algorithm for one of the existing blockchain protocols, and then indicated that they could take that root control and move, because of the similarities across distributed ledger systems, they could move from one system to the next. This was further backed up by a couple of articles in ACM. So there's a tractability issue with blockchain. If we're going to specifically talk about blockchain, that
Yes.
I'd like to hear you talk about.
So that's the point I was making, where there's this classic example where there's this, we conflate things, right? I think the notion, that's the 51% attack that you're alluding to. This is the notion that anyone in this room right now can go log on to a blockchain and spin up a node on a Bitcoin permissionless blockchain. Now, that scenario that you just alluded to, it's null and void. It's null and void. It's not a practical. It's not a risk to the kind of blockchain implementations that we are concerned about from an enterprise agency level type grade implementation. So there's a key fundamental distinction there, where permissionless blockchains, where anyone can right now spin up a node and participate in what you're alluding to. What you typically would see for government agencies, classified clients, enterprises, the kind of guys we speak with on the Hyperledger Foundation, and that's an example of a permissioned, where you know exactly what a node is. Those kind of risk exposures are not at all possible.
But shouldn't we call that a hybrid distributed ledger and stop calling it the blockchain? Because it's not the blockchain. Right?
So I think
It's not the, I mean,
Okay.
as a scientist and engineer, shouldn't we make some distinctions? I mean, we don't write code, nor do we write mathematical equations by allowing loose definitions throughout the proof.
So a couple things. I'm gonna let them respond, but I don't want to turn this into a debate on blockchain.
No,
I got it.
started a question. I didn't get to finish it, so I thought I'd finish the question.
That was a long question.
So yeah, I mean, if I may just wrap up so I just want to draw the quick distinction there, and then Sean, to your point, the risk of quantum computing. I think it's a valid question. It's a concern that we as cybersecurity technologists are concerned about. Depending on who you speak with, we think we're 3, maybe 5 years away from having a quantum computer that potentially would expose all the things we do from a technology standpoint. And it's not just blockchain, right? And if we're alluding to the point that Don mentioned earlier around the most widely adopted use of blockchain technologies, in this case cryptocurrencies, it's financial currencies, right? Financial institutions. I'm not as concerned in the sense that if you looked at the totality of all cryptocurrencies, and in respect to all the things that we do today, our banks, I bank with Bank of America right now and PNC. If the risk of a quantum computer exposing or crippling that infrastructure of a blockchain, which again is only under, say, 1% of the total economic financial assets, then we have bigger problems on our hands. Because why? A quantum computer, again, it would be all of the things we do today, from technology, the lights, the power, this room right now, our banks, everything we do from technology, healthcare, what have you, are all subject to a quantum computer, crippling those infrastructure. But I think with Moore's law, right, I think it's a notion of actually using all the things we built around cybersecurity, where we keep adopting, we keep building solutions. A good one is PKI. It's back to the fact that a PKI, public key infrastructure, is all built around a finite number of central authorities. So moving away from this notion of having 1 or 2 players to a decentralized process where we're building computational power to combat quantum computers, I think is the way to, it's a more sustainable play in my mind.
And I think the gentleman has a good point. We could be tighter with our terminology, but I think the real point is that I was trying to make earlier when I made my opening statement is, not just with blockchain or distributed ledger or whatever term you choose to apply. We want to continue to innovate, but we can't put all our hopes in some new, whatever the latest and greatest is, because as was stated in the session prior to ours, if someone invents it, someone else can eventually hack it. So, let's continue to innovate. Let's continue to look at technologies that are newer, such as blockchain. Let's not stop inventing, but at the same time, let's not get too caught up in the ultimate perfect system as blockchain or distributed ledgers is sometimes characterized to be. It's good stuff. It's not perfect.
So we've talked about quantum computing. We talked about a technology with blockchain. But as Casey and Josh mentioned during the last panel, we're very reactive. And it's across. They didn't say just the government. They said commercial. And I would agree that we are very reactive as a whole. So we hear there's some startup companies in England that have designed machine learning, artificial intelligence that will have networks that can heal themselves very similar to what the human body can. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I didn't see that coming up. That was exactly my response, right? It's the natural evolution of technology, right? And I love that analogy where so imagine the way we typically manage, say, servers, where we update patches through a central server. So the analogy that I use is the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? Fundamentally, a server, an IoT device, relies upon like a central thing to actually put a patch to actually get it up and running. So we need to evolve, and I think we're doing that in some pockets where solutions are evolving to a point where, like a human system, as you alluded to, Sean, where if I have a headache right now, if my body tells me that I might be coming down with a flu, I start seeing those symptoms. So IoT devices, servers, switches, all the things that we use to protect typical infrastructure. Over time, we're building IoT-based solutions in labs right now where we need not necessarily wait to that 20-day, 30-day patch cycle to patch a potential exposure because we saw a CVE. A CVE, again, is like a vulnerability exposure, right? Where we know, hey, that a hacker somewhere in Ukraine found this bug, and with that bug, we can actually exfiltrate data from the server. And typically what happens is we get it to an administrator puts in like a change request, it takes a couple days, and then you patch that server. But we're moving, there's this now evolution where we move from this reactive process to there's a peer-to-peer interaction with devices. A device can then tell the next device to say, hey, we're down 2 patches. We need the latest patch. We see this on the system. Let's upgrade right now so we can actually now wait for an administrator to go push a button to actually update a patch. So those are the kind of things that we're saying where IoT devices, systems that protect our core assets, we need to evolve from that process of being reactive to more active now. So I think we're getting close to that stage. Again, I like to use the Maslow hierarchy of needs, and I think on some more mature systems, we're getting there. We're actually doing this kind of things. And with that, I'm really excited about what the future holds.
Oh.
Even in the AI and ML machine learning realms, though, we're still seeing, first of all, perhaps some overhyping there. But second of all, a lot of the applications for these technologies are still reactive in nature. For instance, natural language processing to detect phishing attacks. Well, we're reacting to phishing attacks. Machine learning to detect domain-generated algorithms. We're reacting to beaconing back to those domains. It's sophisticated stuff, but it's not, but it's still reactive in nature, which we have to get away from, as our previous panelists warned us about. We've also discovered that, and this is true of all technology, any technology is value neutral. If we invent it, it can be used against us. We've seen that with cloud technology. We've seen that with AI. Machine learning algorithms can be fooled quite easily by other machine, teaching algorithms, so to speak, where it's pretty easy, it turns out, to take an image of a banana and just mess with it just a little bit, and it will be recognized as a toaster. And this is literally true. So we have to continue to innovate and work with these new technologies such as AI, machine learning, and blockchain or distributed ledger, but we have to recognize that there's never going to be a panacea. As I see it, the world of cybersecurity is at bottom a human problem. It's not something that can be solved. It's something that has to be managed, I think, and it's just an ongoing process. And so let's use the tools. Let's continue to invent more and more tools to make it as hard as possible for our adversaries. Let's continue to work hard. Let's get government involved with the defense of our nation by fostering innovation, quantum computing, distributed ledger blockchain, artificial intelligence, and so on. But let's recognize that it's not going. We're not going to find the answer, right? We're going to have to manage manage this situation. And at the end of the day, it's a human problem. People want to do bad things with technology.
So we got about 4 minutes left. Both of you have product divisions. Both of you have professional services divisions. What excites you about the future of technologies? Don, why don't you start?
What excites me? Well, you know, despite all the doom and gloom that we hear about this state of cybersecurity today, I do think that there's room for us to foster workforce and to bring into play our young people to actually defend this country. I mean, let's realize we invented it, we can fix it, we can make it work. There's an upside to this. There's a way that we can bring the incredible energy and innovation and inventiveness of the young workforce now to bear on this problem. I think that's really going to happen. I'm probably a little too old for that right now, but I want to see the young people actually get excited about using this technology, developing this technology for the betterment of our nation. I think there's a patriotic and positive aspect that we can bring to bear on this that can really energize technology and technological innovation in this country right now. So I want to put in, yes, we can't pretend that everything's all fine, but we also can't get stuck in it's all doom and gloom either. If we present cybersecurity as a losing battle to young people, why would they want to get involved with it? Who wants to play for the losing team? We have to recognize that, yes, we can win this battle, and that's what excites me about this, is that, yeah, we got a hill to climb, but we can get there. So.
Thanks, Sean. Thanks. So I think I agree with you, Don, and it's all around and for me, I think it's a notion of awareness. Gone are the days like where we can pretend that we don't know what's going on. So I think it's the conventional wisdom would suggest that we are well aware of the risks and the downsides of not being active, on being reactive. So we are well aware. So I think when we couple the fact that getting people trained up, skills shortage where it's pretty significant right now around cybersecurity consultants, we struggle to actually fill positions right now within IBM and the industry as a whole. So I think ultimately what really excites me is the fact that I think that we are aware of what these concerns are, what the risks are, and we are constantly changing the narrative. We're not necessarily being called into we're not an afterthought anymore. Gone are the days where cybersecurity professionals, we got called in after the fact. So I think we're in boardrooms now. We're part of the conversation, and we're training. We're doing all kind of job training activities, and we're not necessarily even looking at just we're looking at blue collar skills as well. So all those things that we're doing right now, conversing the world, getting the right people, speaking, talking, and engaging, those are really promising. And I think with all those standards in play, I'm really, really excited about the future. I think we stand a better chance of actually protecting our systems and having this place be a better world for everyone that lives in it.
Gentlemen, I'm afraid we're out of time. I would like to thank you both for joining me today on the stage, and of course, to ICIT for having us.
And thanks to Parham as well.
Agreed. Shows are brilliant.
Thanks, man. Perfect. All right, so we'll have the next. Thank you, John. Thank you. Thank you, man. Yeah, thank you. So with that, we'll have the next panelists come on stage, and I'll have Michael, our ICIT fellow, introduce the panelists and the panel, and we'll get things going. And after that, we will break for lunch. And I will say before we get started, is anyone missing their keys to their Kia?
It's part of the wrap.
Hey, Stan. Do you have a Kia, and are you missing your keys? Oh, you are. You won the raffle, sir. There you go. You're welcome.
Sure.
This is true. This could be a cyber vulnerability here. I don't know.
Good morning, or I guess I should say good afternoon now. Recognizing that we're the only thing standing between you and lunch, we will try to make this scintillating but appropriately economical as far as the use of time. I'm Michael Eisenberg. I'm a newly minted ICIT fellow. I'm also the chairman of the American Bar Association's Information Security Committee, and my day job is as principal cyber policy counsel at the MITRE Corporation in our Washington area offices. I have the honor of being the moderator of this panel, which is going to focus on cyber in the small and medium business environments. And we have a extraordinarily qualified panel of subject matter experts to address this today. I'll do the polite thing and start by introducing Sally Sweeney of KPMG, John Brickey of MasterCard, and Stan Wiseman of Micro Focus. Because we have a relatively short time, we're not going to try and boil the ocean here and provide solutions for everything that we might address regarding cyber in the small and medium-sized business environment. We want to leave you with a clearer idea about what the cyber challenges are that may be unique to those who aren't Fortune 1000 entities. And we want to give you some practical recommendations of real things that you can do in your own companies and communities to address the cyber challenge, whatever your posture, whether you're a vendor, whether you are an NGO, or whether you are an extensive networked consumer of the variety of wired services. We want to address a couple of different, perhaps three key concepts that will thread throughout this. The value of the data that you collect, use, and share in your daily activities, your roles and responsibilities to the larger cyber ecosystem. Even though you may not be the biggest fish in the pond, you have an important role and impact, and the unique and distinct benefits that you have because you are not the biggest fish in the pond. The smaller entities may be able to have influence, may be able to establish protocols and models for behavior that other entities can't do with the same nimbleness or courage that you might exhibit. We're going to thread a couple of familiar phrases into the discussion. Critical infrastructure will be heard more than once. We're going to talk a little bit about supply chain risk, and I think it's inevitable in the borderless cyber environment that we're going to at least mention the acronym GDPR. And if we fail to answer your now prompted curiosity about any one of those, be sure to ask your questions about it. The environment we live in today from a cyber perspective is, in my view, characterized by the lack of congressional action to shape U.S. cyber policy, the incredibly expanded role of the standards community, and particularly NIST as a new benchmark for standards making in information technology. And finally, and most importantly perhaps for small and medium entities, the emerging role of the states in the policy environment, both their appetite to do and say things about cyber and the importance that they do and say things about cyber. To kick it off, I'm going to ask John to do the kind of thing that everybody does, but nobody does it as well as we're going to do it, and that's to give you his view of the top 5 things that you as small and medium entities could do to improve your cybersecurity posture. John? Well, sure, you can introduce.
Okay, just real quickly. So John Brickey, I look a little different in my picture there. I was in government for 30 years. Hard to believe I'm that old. But I retired from the military last year after 30 years of service. I worked at Cyber Command, NSA, US Cyber Command, Army Cyber Command, Army Cyber Institute, and a few other places. And moved over to MasterCard, where I'm really privileged to be a member of the team there. There I developed cybersecurity strategy. I look for solutions beyond the horizon and work on develop and manage partnerships and evangelize, just like my title says. So real quickly, yeah, I think my recommendation would be to go out and buy an AI, blockchain, quantum cloud cybersecurity solution. That's it. You're done. No, I actually saw that at a conference recently. Someone threw out all the words at once, and I'll try not to mention them ever again. No, seriously though, I would start with a pretty reasonable approach. Actually, Center for Internet Security has their critical controls. The first one is identifying the hardware in your environment. So I would say identify the hardware and software in your environment, but what is it you're really trying to protect? So whatever the organization is, you're protecting something. You may not even know that you're at risk, but you are at risk. It could be someone just trying to block your access to your resources. So you need to know what those resources are. Then you need to start understanding risk. So I think of threats. We just heard about the adversaries a couple of panels ago, actually both panels. Your vulnerabilities. So once you know what your assets are, there are vulnerabilities to really for everything. And then what the consequences might be. So not getting access to your information, not getting having your information modified, all sorts of consequences out there. So the next would be to then develop a strategy. Okay, so once you know all these things you're scared to death, go out and develop a strategy. And I'll talk about that in a second. But that also includes, so in the strategy includes prioritizing your objectives. What is it you're trying to achieve? How do you measure your performance? And then how do you align your resources to those objectives and priorities? The next I would say has nothing to do with cybersecurity specifically, but it's communicate. Communicate to the leadership of the organization in a way that makes sense to the leadership of the organization in business terms. So someone said this term years ago. It's been used many times in the military. That's don't be a self-licking ice cream cone. And I actually didn't like that when I heard it for the first few years. After a while, I realized that makes sense. I mean, we don't exist for ourselves. We're a cost center in most organizations. So we're not doing cybersecurity to do cybersecurity. We're doing it to protect the organization, to protect the business, and so we have to be able to communicate in their terms. It's not about us. And then the last step, I would say, because I do this, is develop and leverage and manage partnerships. You can't do this alone. We heard someone talking earlier about the team concept. That's totally true. There are lots of resources out there, and just by quick plug on a couple. So if you're a smaller organization, you don't have a lot of resources, you don't know where to start, it's been out there for 6 years now. There's an FCC 2.0 cyber website, a great checklist, but it's just a checklist. That's the very basic. What we're doing at MasterCard is now working with the Cyber Readiness Institute, which is a new organization. It's co-chaired by my CEO, so I care a lot about it. He was also on the President's Cybersecurity Commission, so he gets it. And it's also got corporate partnerships with Microsoft and others. And the purpose of that organization is to actually provide some tools and content to help small and medium businesses with this huge challenge. And so that was kind of long, but they're my 5 things wrapped up.
Sally, do you want to take off on that?
I would love to take off. Sally Sweeney, I've been doing this for, I look very young in that picture. I'm also very young in reality, really young. I've been doing this for a little over 20 years in public sector, private sector, supported Baltimore County government for 6 years, stood up their first security office. Before that, I was out in Tyson's and telecommunications and wireless technology for a few years in my early part of my career, and then I moved into General Dynamics information technology and worked there, led their health sector cyber program for a little over 4 years, and then I became the division lead for Homeland Health and Civilian for cybersecurity, leading really top 10 deals, 100 million plus deals, being the technical lead architect for those. Now I work for KPMG, honored to be at KPMG. Just joined there a couple months ago, and they have a really very strong cybersecurity practice that I'm helping to lead and formalize and grow. 800-171, in case you're not familiar with that, is something that if you're a small to mid-sized business, that depending on the type of work you're doing, and know that I'm coming at this from sort of a system integrator, government system integrator standpoint. So
That's NIST SP 800-171.
Yes, sir, from MITRE.
On the NIST website.
Who they write all that stuff, or support it at least, right?
Sometimes, right?
Yeah. So that is something to be very aware of in case you're not already. You probably are, because if you didn't see all the deadlines and the, notifications and communications that came out saying, hey, you got to be compliant if you're going to be handling CUI on behalf of the government, controlled and classified information. Is that it? I've seen different interpretations of that acronym, so I wanted to get validation from my people up here. So that's something to think about as a small to mid-sized business, and it can be expensive to do that, to be compliant. So that's why you do need to make sure you understand what data you have and understand really your obligations. So that really ties back to what John was saying, that you really do have to be self-aware, understand what data types you're processing, understanding what you must be compliant with, whether it's HIPAA, whether it's PCI, whether it's the 800-171, whether it's, you know, any other number of GDPR. Yes, sir. So jumping in. So that's something to think about. The other piece that I've thought about since we've been sort of talking about this internally, preparing to talk to you all, is the supply chain component. If you are part of a supply chain, if you're, again, coming from a government contracting standpoint as a system integrator, when you are part of a supply chain, and let's say you sub to a large, like a General Dynamics or a Leidos or a Lockheed or Booz, there's going to be flow down language. So you have to make sure you are looking at that flow down language, and that any implications for your small to mid-sized business, that you're ready to take on that flow down language. Whatever the prime is accountable for, typically the subs will have to be on the hook for that too. Again, that can be costly, but there are ways around that can be cost effective for managed service options, for having someone who can come in, who is a consultant, to come in and advise you and guide you, whether it's a cybersecurity consultant or just a general technology consultant or legal advice as well.
Very good. Stan Wisman, I've been in this for a very long time as well. I got started in the early 80s at the National Security Agency. They had something called the National Computer Security Center back then, and was an Orange Book evaluator, if any of you remember that. But long time ago. But been in a variety of different roles. I'm currently a security strategist at Micro Focus. Prior to that, I was a deputy CISO and then CISO at Fannie Mae. And so, have an opportunity now to talk to a lot of different companies, a variety of sizes, and the reality is nobody is their target state, right? I mean, we look at the challenges that small and medium-sized businesses have, who have probably very, very few resources. Even very large organizations are on this journey in different functional areas and are rarely, if ever, happy with where they are. We had the analogy earlier of we're playing checkers against the adversary who's playing chess. We're actually probably in a three-dimensional chess board. And if you look at the complexities of trying to address all these different aspects with, honestly, many times with these small businesses, they have the perspective, it won't be me, right? I mean, why would they attack us, And the Verizon data breach report, which is a great resource, comes out every year, indicated that over 61% of the breaches, data breaches, were of small businesses. That's a pretty big number. The sad thing with small business attacks is that, unfortunately, there's a cost aspect, but I think it's United Global, I can't remember the source of this one, but they indicated that after 6 months, over 50% of these small businesses go out of business that have suffered attacks. And that's just scary. I mean, I had a personal experience where my daughter is working at this design firm here in DC. Great job, company had been around for 30 years, and they were in the midst of going through the digital transformation. And my daughter was telling me one evening, yeah, we're taking all the records we've had, all the different plans for all these different organizations they've design work for, and we're digitizing it, and then we're going to get rid of all the paper records. Okay, so who's doing the security? I don't think we have anybody, Dad, that's doing security. We have an IT guy that's doing part-time stuff, and then we have this company doing this, and just like, great, you're not going to be in business much longer. So it's one of those things like, can I talk to somebody in your company? Can we just have a chat? And again, it goes back to why would they want to hurt us? And I think DHS has this program of especially for small businesses, of stop, think, and then connect. And it's one of those things that you gotta realize that you may not be the target, you may be, but you could be part of the supply chain to get to somebody else. And honestly, nowadays, if you connect to the internet, it doesn't matter. You know,
One need only recall the target attack, and the vector was the HVAC system.
That's right. That's a great example.
All three of you have, either with those explicit words or implied, a set of challenges that I guess I would call resources and bandwidth and scope and scale. Anybody care to drill down on that a little bit?
You want to go?
To say, yeah, so on the resource, scope, and scale, I can say that at MasterCard, we spent $1 billion in the last 3 years on cybersecurity.
And obviously small and medium businesses
they don't have that. So, we're hoping to raise the water level for everyone. But if you talk to our roughly 600 people in our cybersecurity shop, which we've grown by 45% in the last 3 years as well, and we still don't have enough talent, right? We're still looking for more talent. But we probably say we need to spend another $2 billion before everyone feels better. It's just it's a never-ending, I hate to use the word arms race because it has serious connotations. This does too, but it's different. But it takes strong leadership to prioritize and to realize that we can't eat this elephant at once. It has to be one bite at a time. You have to have a strategy. And again, you have to be in sync with your business.
When I think about so you got me thinking about the fact that big companies don't have it all figured out. Don't tell anybody, but they don't. They're still struggling with it. It's going to be a journey, and you should treat it as a journey, right? But since we're talking about small and mid-sized businesses, you do have to understand your role and responsibility there. And if you have that poor little IT person sitting in the cube, right, doesn't ever leave because he's got so much work to do, and they keep getting tasks added to them because the CEO is well within his or her right to want to grow the business. That's number one. So that's where you want to put your investment from a business owner standpoint. I want to grow my business. I want to market. I want to get, my BD people out and, making sure we have a pipeline and going after that work. So cybersecurity is like way down the line. So it is that challenge that will be ongoing, I think, to make it more part of not the afterthought, and make it, and I think that a lot of product vendors are becoming smarter about that. I've had some very strong opinions about product vendors in the past, but the more I talk to product vendors, I do think that they are listening and they're engaging to try to not just, jam a product down your throat and put a square peg in a round hole. I think they really are trying to be business, trying to bring more solutions rather than selling a product. And I think that you can't expect to get it all done with one product too. I think there's, just like this special publication 853, controls are technical, operational, management. So you do have to look at it in your own organization in the same way. There are technical controls, there are management controls, and operational controls. Your people are also something you got to educate, right? Simple stuff. But that really will reduce a lot of your problems right there, that they're not doing silly stuff with their assets at home or sharing information where they shouldn't be sharing, and that can really make a big difference, believe it or not.
Including security as part of the culture. And that's part of it is there's some low-hanging fruit here, and we've had a lot of good advice today about, the understanding the data assets that you're trying to protect, and taking action to do so. So having backups, offsite backups, having a data breach plan, and knowing what steps you would take. How would you actually continue to operate if you had something happen? And don't have the deer in the headlights kind of approach of, whoa, it happened, and then you don't have a plan. Have something prepared. Again, hygiene.
Well, importantly, I think what you've just focused is it's not just protecting your network, but if the asset that your network exists to support is a set of data. Know that, know what's your valuable data, and have your strategy include protecting that valuable data.
And know what you need to have to operate and what your backup plan would be to continue to produce your business
Many
operation.
entities get focused on, well, we've got to protect that server, or we've got to protect our nodes, or
Right.
we've got to protect that big investment we have in sensor devices. But they're all part of a system that ultimately maybe is oriented specifically on gathering the data you need to do your business.
Right.
If it's in the cloud, nobody knows where it is, right? So then,
And, you know, some of the other things, and we've talked about is identities, you know, both human as well as non-carbon life forms, and understanding how to control that and having things like multi-factor, two-factor authentication as part of what you have for your internal users, as well as your customers, protecting their access to your services you're providing. So there are things that you can do. The resource challenge is there. I think that there are a number of things you can take on as a service that can actually offload some of that. We're seeing a lot of folks, you know, recognizing they don't have the resources, they can't scale to the need that they have. They're outsourcing to managed service offerings or to consulting organizations to help them. Now, a small business may not be able to pay a consultant fee like a Booz Allen or KPMG for a long extended period of time, but you want to understand your risk, and hopefully you can, you know, consume some services that help you, you know, at least get a baseline security posture.
So just as many small entities don't aspire to become super Fortune 1000s, their goal may just be to go from being a two-person organization to a four-person organization. Same thing is true of the IT shop.
Yeah,
don't aspire to be a 600-person IT shop. Do what's appropriate and proportionate to your scope as an entity.
If the burglar is going down the street and he sees that these 6 houses have an alarm system, you're going to go to the one that hopefully that doesn't. You know, you don't want to be that low-hanging fruit that's just so easy to pick off unless they're targeting you. And again, either because of your assets or because you're part of that supply chain and you're just using them as a stepping stone.
We've got just a few minutes left, and I wanted to give the audience an opportunity to ask these excellent people any specific questions. Are there some questions from the floor for the panel?
while he's moving to Mike, just want to add a comment from earlier. People often say that culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I found that to be so true because I work on strategy all the time, but we have a similar path in culture, and I did that in DoD, and that's a never-ending journey.
So, Michael, nobody mentioned GDPR, so I thought I would ask a question and I invite you to, or maybe your panelists, to discuss whether U.S. firms, who has to worry about GDPR compliance in this country?
I have a little bit of knowledge on this. It's not really my bailiwick. However, so MasterCard, just a little plug here for a second. We actually formed a company, and our partner, I won't say because I forget the name of the partner, but another big company. I think they just spoke in the last panel. We formed a company to solve our GDPR problem and actually make money out of that problem, help solve it for others. We're obviously at MasterCard's subject to GDPR, and it is a serious concern today. But one other thing, we belong to the NTSC, and together we lobbied Congress recently because we have to stay ahead of the curve. Because it's not just GDPR, it's going to be here, it's already here in America because California passed a law. Hopefully it's not the law that will affect everyone one day, but hopefully we will come up with a national law that makes sense for us as a country. Otherwise, big companies will have a heck of a time dealing with all those different laws, and small companies just won't be able to do it. They'll have to decide to stay out of certain markets.
This isn't legal advice, but I think John nailed it. What we're seeing in the way U.S. law firms are advising their clients, even in the publicly published GDPR advice, is you may not even be doing business in Europe, but it's very likely someone you're doing business with is doing business in Europe. And many of the other geographies, Japan, some of the Southwest Asian countries, have adopted GDPR-like regimes already. So the whole globe is moving in that direction, even if the U.S. statutory system hasn't caught up yet. In on the ground in practice, you ought to be in compliance with the GDPR requirements if you don't want someone looking over your shoulder to seeing what kind of privacy regime you have in place and how good a job you are doing of protecting PII in the global market space.
And I do think that, as far as behavior, a number of companies were doing been assessing their risk exposure to GDPR and determining what steps they need to take to be compliant. And I've sensed that a number of firms are, in that. Well, they're different. There's a whole spectrum. Those are being very proactive, like we just heard from MasterCard. They have to be. And there are others that are maybe U.S.-based that are a wait-and-see mode, and they're not necessarily spending a lot of money just yet until they see the penalties that are applied and see the risk. But, as was pointed out, California, Brazil, other countries are picking up their game, and you're not going to be able to play that wait-and-see much longer. You're going to have to act.
It's an approach to regulation that everybody is moving towards. Are there questions from the floor? Well, going in reverse order, could I ask each of you to perhaps take a minute to sum up where you think we are in the small, medium-sized entity environment?
So I think, again, part of the challenge is the ability to actually understand your risk and how to actually address it. You do have things like you may not be able to afford a chief information security officer for your small firm, but you can rent a CISO. You can actually get, have a CISO for hire for a short period of time or have them drop in so you don't have to have a full-time chief information security officer. That could help you build a strategy and understand a roadmap of where you need to go over a period of time. I think the days of, it won't be me are over. You have to address it, and just a matter of how you can prioritize it and allocate the right budget and level of action necessary.
Is there a question?
I just have a comment in regards to small and medium businesses. And so when it comes down to the actual cybersecurity framework, or you're looking at NIST, it's very technical, right? And so if large Fortune 500, Fortune 100 companies are having a hard time with that interpretation, there's no way that a small, medium business is going to be able to translate that into what it really means to them. So for GDPR, and especially the adequacy law that California Consumer Protection Act is looking into, now that it's passed, it's really, I believe, up to us and up to possibly the standards to make it easier to digest. So when you look even with the new revisions, right, 837 with privacy and risk control framework, in revision 5 that's coming out, adding privacy to it, if you're not used to reading this and you just look at it and it's like, low, medium, high, and you're somewhere in there, but there's all these dependencies upon that as well. And so even if you get a CISO, right, if they don't understand the basics of the standards, they're still going to be lost. They're still going to have the fines, and they're really not going to get anywhere in regards to the actual maturity level of the company and where we want to be if we really want to be cyber secure with this warfare, right? And so what GDPR was trying to do is kind of like to make it a little bit easier, but unfortunately, without proper guidance here in the U.S., we don't know what to do. So
I think you've done a really good job of pointing out the practical problems of translating a sophisticated area of technology that even sophisticated technologists struggle with and making it understandable and actionable by the average entity on the street, the small and medium business. We had hoped to contribute a little bit to that today and hope that we may have tracked it along, but you make an excellent point. John, do you have any final words?
You did sum it up beautifully, and that's most of what I've done my career, is try to make some of those complex topics, break them down into a way I could tell my twin 11-year-olds, frankly. Because they do ask, what does that mean? Mommy, you're on a call. What are they talking about? What does that mean? You should be able to, for a cybersecurity professional, it is my job to be able to parse through it, say what I understand, say what's still a little fuzzy, but say in general, I think this is how it applies to us and our business mission and our objectives, right? That's all that matters. You don't need to boil the ocean when it comes to understanding regulations. You don't need to go out and get a JD, because that's, unfortunately, a lot of lawyers have written a lot of this. So you do have to be able to know, in some of these publications, you know where the real meat is, right? That's why you would pay some money, have an investment, to have someone come in and say, I know really where we're, don't worry about all this stuff. This is noise and this is, you know, doesn't apply. Here's where we need to really think about it. And so, and it depends on your business. It depends on, you know, there are things you'd have to think through based on your particular objectives. But that's what I've always done when I've tackled that language, which the first time I became a federal contractor at NASA headquarters, and the first day I was told I was a privacy expert. Privacy Act of 1974. Go read it. It's great nighttime reading. But I had to really quickly understand and learn from others around me how to interpret and not spend hours and hours and hours. And it does take, that's why, you know, those of us have been choosing this field for as long as we have. Somehow we've been able to figure that out. But I think that skill set of being able to engage folks who are on the business side, who are non-technical, to bridge that is if your organization can find that or outsource that, bring someone in to simplify it, that's a good way to go.
And again, going back to understanding what the threat is to your business, that helps you pivot to the things, the controls you need to focus on more. And so that, you know, if you look at the CSF, the cybersecurity framework, and all the specific, you know, recommended controls in there at the highest level, before you can get to 853, right? You know, you can focus on the things that you need to worry about most, you know, and that is really the prioritization that you need to think about first.
So I guess I'll close out real quick. So just, I would say, lean on your partners. So ICIT, Parham here is the director, great organization that's hoping to provide thought leadership and sound advice to others. Again, I mentioned the Cyber Readiness Institute, which is a new organization where we're trying to provide content and tools to help others. So partnerships and number 5 on my list, I would do that.
So we've tried to give you some pointers to manage the strategy for doing the triage of figuring out where you can outgun them, because the small and medium entities are going to be challenged, won't have all the resources, won't have the bandwidth. We hope that our presentation has given you some compass pointers in that direction. And we very much appreciate your attention and hope that we've answered the call for you. Thanks very much. Thanks to our speakers.
All right, and that concludes ICIT's portion of the program. We hope that that was insightful and educational and a little bit scary, because that's a good thing, because sometimes fear does motivate. With that, I'm going to have Carol come up. I'll be at lunch. Hopefully I can chat with any of you if you have any questions, and I think Carol has an exciting raffle to do.
All right. This is on? Okay. I'm Carol Geyer. I'm the Chief Development Officer at Oasis. Did we have a great morning of programming or what today, huh? Pretty good. All right. So hopefully by now everyone in the room knows that Oasis is the open source, open standards consortium where STIX and TAXI and OpenC2 and CSAF are developed, as well as a range of other security standards like KMIP and PKCS and SAML. And so we're very proud to host this event, Borderless Cyber. And now is the raffle portion. Before we go to lunch, we're raffling off some gift cards to Amazon, courtesy of our sponsors. So if there's anyone in the room who does not have a raffle ticket, if you'd raise your hand, Jane will come around and make sure you can participate. All right, so while we're doing that, Oasis